Hi. It's great to see you in June again. I think hopefully this is going to be my last appearance in June, and I'm going to see you face to face next year. So today I'm going to talk about what happened for last almost like 2 years, when the COVID started and how it has affected the Korea economy. So well, I think we went to the dark room, and we is about to see a kind of the shape of the room and how the COVID has affected the Korean economy. So next page. So as you can see in left-hand side graph, the Korea economic growth has been quite V-shaped rebound. It went down to minus 3.2, but it rebounded by 6% in second quarter of 2021. When many economists predicted how the shape of the rebound is going to be, they all talk about L-shaped rebound because we haven't experienced this kind of the loss like a pandemic, and they thought that it's going to be much longer time to rebound because we would not know when the vaccine is going to be available and how the people is going to behave during the pandemic. But and usually when there is a small kind of not a pandemic epidemic, usually the economy has shown some V-shaped rebound, and this was not the exception again. Even there was a kind of a heavy kind of a pandemic, Korea economy shows a V-shaped rebound. If you see the right hand side graph, it's not just the one sector which drove the Korea's rebound. Consumption was pretty resilient in second quarter, and it also went down heavily, but it was able to come back. And also, export has been quite strong, and also the investment, a bit ironic, and investment was very strong during the pandemic. So people saw the corporate is not going to invest because uncertainty, and because they do not know it's the right choice to invest it. But I mean, at the end of the day, there was a quite strong and resilient kind of the investment during the pandemic. Okay, so next page. If you look at what has driving Korea's solid rebound it was export. Korea is pretty dependent on export economy, small open economy. Export takes around 40% of the 40 to 50%, depending on the year GDP and depending on the Korean exchange rate. But usually it takes 40 to 45% of our GDP. And import takes around 35 or 40% of our GDP. So Korea is a very open economy, depend on the export sector and external sector. And when the external sector is very strong, Korea was able to recover. So as you can see in left hand side graph, Korea's export has been quite very strong and drove the Korea's rebound. I think it's because Korea is more or less a manufacturing based economy. It's not a service sector oriented economy. So every other economy need to spend even during the pandemic, and they need some country who are able to produce it. And Korea was one who has a very strong manufacturing kind of infrastructure, and Korea was kind of act as a industry support during the pandemic. So if you see the right hand side graph, you can see what kind of the sectors or what products Korea has been positioning during the pandemic. A petrochemical was very strong, and because of a bio kind of chemistry needs, Korea was able to export petrochemicals. And then because people want to travel by themselves, there was a strong demand for auto and auto parts. So Korea was the big manufacturer for the auto, and that was another driver for Korea's growth. And also steel, which is a fundamental infrastructure for Korea and globally, kind of driving the rebound during the pandemic. Of course, the main sector for the Korea's strength is a semiconductor. Korea is able to produce a semiconductor. Probably only country who can produce 80% of the the semiconductor, Samsung and SK Hynix. So I think that has been the big driver for Korea's strong export and the reason behind the quite resilient demand during the pandemic. Next page. If you see like the sentiment of the economics, usually when there was kind of let's say the SARS impact in Hong Kong, it takes time for people to come back or to build their sentiment. So I mean, even though economy shows some signs of rebound, like the sentiment takes much longer time to rebound. But as you can see in the in this graph, like the sentiment was also able to come back quite V-shaped rebound. So which is quite different. I think it's because of the people can access the information more than early 2000. So this is kind of the information era has changed the sentiment of the people. But anyway, it's not just the economy, but also sentiment has rebounded quite quickly. When we look at the service sector versus the manufacturing sector, I think manufacturing was a bit faster than the service sector, but still we see sentiment-wise the almost a comeback even before the COVID-19. So I mean, Korea is kind of fully recovered from the COVID in a sentiment perspective. Next page. So what are the reason for the sentiment building? I think it's basically industry production was as I said, Korea is a manufacturing based economy, so industry production was quite resilient, and that has driving Korea's growth. But the interesting is a service sector production. It was lagging of the industrial production, but it was able to come back middle of this year, even though there was a Delta variant impact to Korea's service sector. So even though the service was not in full capacity, service sector was able to improve compared to last year. That is quite positive news, and Korea is about to turn its system to the with COVID system. So they were going to relax the service sector industry, which is going to drive up the service sector consumption and service sector production in probably fourth quarter of 2021. So far, most of the Korea's growth is driven by the investment and also export and also government spending. But moving forward, I think private consumption driven by the service sector demand is going to kind of drive the Korea's growth. If you see the positive pattern of the Korea's industrial production is the shipment, it has been increasing quite rapidly, but in the meantime, inventory has been decreasing. That is usually the case when the economy shows the signs of a kind of expansion. So that is quite positive news. And now industry inventory need to kind of build up, which will kind of support the Korea's kind of stronger IP production in the fourth quarter of 2021. So looking at the industrial production and the sentiment, I think Korea is going to be able to grow close to a 4% growth for 2021, which is quite resilient. Last year, Korea kind of dropped minus 0.9 or 1% of the GDP, which is not that bad considering the pandemic. So come back with a 4% GDP growth. Korea's overall grow 3% in 2 years. So divide by 2 is going to 1.5% for every year. That's not bad. So during the pandemic, Korea was able to kind of stay on business and open for business and open for production, and quite different compared to other economies. Next page. So when you look at, as I said, investment was quite strong, especially facility investment was very strong during the pandemic. Usually, Korea increased the export that tend to drive up the facility investment. So a strong export drive up the facility investment. That's why Korea has so very strong the import too, because most of Korea's imports are intermediate good and facility investment related goods. So that has been the main reason for driving up the the investment. So when the export goes up and import goes up much faster, then net export cannot be as a strong contributor to the GDP growth. But usually when the import goes up, which drives the positive investment, which is a positive news for the like a GDP accounting. So for Korea's case, like investment was very strong, and that is a bit against the intuitive kind of the argument, because I mean, it's a bit weird, like the firms invest during the pandemic, but that has been the case for Korea. Right now, investment has been very strong, but the construction investment has been up and down, but still kind of recently showing kind of a negative growth. I think it's more or less kind of COVID impact, like people cannot actually work and construct, and so that has been declining. So like manufacturing sector side, is most of the job is done by the like automation and machine, but the construction, we need the people to actually at present, and that has been driving the kind of the slowdown of the construction investment. And I think that is going to improve slowly, and probably next year the construction is going to make most of the investment side and facility investment. Next page. When you look at the unemployment during the pandemic, that's quite interesting. Like the blue line on the top of the left-hand side graph is the unemployment rate. That has been very kind of stable. Even during the kind of the worst period of time, we went up to only like above just 5%. And then it came down to below 3% recently. So the unemployment rate has been very stable, unlike other economies. I think it's because like the safeguard for Korea job security, it has provided unemployment quite low. So sometimes like people talk about like inflexible labor market. It is a burden for Korea's economy, but usually during the risk, like because of the stable employment, people was able to spend it, and that has been driving the private consumption. So during the kind of pandemic era, the labor market inflexibility actually benefit like overall economic system and social safety during the pandemic. But as you can see in a blue below green graph, like the actually number of jobs created during the pandemic went down badly, and then show some recovery this year. So people left the job because they are not. If you don't show the intention to work, they are not counted as economically active population. So you're not counted the unemployment rate. So that's why unemployment has been stable, even though number actually working has declined. As you can see in the right-hand side graph, even though people has not out of job, they were paid, and so they still maintain the consumption. So auto sales has actually increased during the pandemic. So it's a bit kind of also counterintuitive, like when during the pandemic, where people get the money, and actually people were kind of saved more, and people had more money because of the government transfer to the household. So that actually drive the consumption in autos, especially kind of the expensive stuff. This is weird, like when the economy shows -1% growth, actually people spend in luxury goods. So that was kind of interesting to watch during the pandemic. Next page. So as I say, like there was a huge transfer for the government to the households. So that's why Koreans were able to save during the pandemic. Actually, the saving rate went up to like 38%, which is very, very high during the pandemic. But unlike the household, the government is one who spend a lot. So Korean government has been very fiscally balanced, but they kind of showed like a -5, -6% deficit for the 2020 and 2021, which is a bit unusual because the Korean government has been very the prudent in fiscal balance. I think this is more or less the overall fiscal balance, but if you look at the managed balance, it has shown negative growth, and So that's why the positive of the fiscal balance is a bit deceiving in this graph. But the governments the spending was the one who drive the Korea's the growth last year, and also that drove the debt to GDP ratio a bit high. So usually Koreans government debt to GDP was below 40%, but it has increased quite rapidly. It broke 40%, and I think by the 2025 we're going to reach a 60% of our the GDP. So government debt is increasing quite rapidly, which is a bit worry in the future, but probably still a 40 or 50% of the government debt to GDP is very stable compared to other economies. Most of the OECD economies are over 80%. So 50% level of the government debt is pretty resilient, and that is the reason behind for Korea was able to drive the government consumption to save the economy. As you can see right inside the graph, the Bank of Korea also provide a lot of liquidity during the pandemic. M1 is the one liquidity provided by the central bank, and even though the commercial bank was not produce a lot of faster M2 supply, but actually M1 supply was strong, but with the central bank and driving the liquidity during the pandemic. So next page. Usually we talk about whether fiscal policy is effective in driving Korea's growth. But as you can see, left hand side, government spending actually drive a lot of private spending in Korea. There is a high correlation, so which is usually positive news. And also, during the pandemic, we see because of a lot of liquidity provided by the central bank, drove up the housing price. So I think it's not just Korea. Every economist has seen a house price rising during the last year. So Korea was not the exception. And Korea's housing price went up quite rapidly. And usually, rising housing prices causing a wealth effect to households. So people feel rich, so they spend more. So that has been the one driver for Korea's the consumer spending, which is quite a positive factor for Korea's growth. Next page. When you look at the downside of the the expansionary monetary policy during the pandemic is household debt is rising quite rapidly. Household debt is reached close to our GDP level, so 100% of our GDP level, which is a bit of concern. Also, house price has been increasing quite rapidly. That is creating financial imbalance. People who has equity become richer because their housing price went up. But the people who doesn't have a house, it's going to be hard for young generation to buy a house in the long run. So because of the abundant liquidity, it has driving up the asset price, which is creating inequality, which is going to be some big problem in moving forward. House price went up because of basically because of liquidity, but Korea could be a bit different situation. Our price went up because there has been less supply, even though there has been a strong demand for the housing, especially during the pandemic. People want to spend more time in house, and they want to spend more a bigger house during the pandemic. They need more spaces. So there was a demand, but there was no supply. But when there is abundant liquidity and which drives a strong demand, and when you do not provide the house, the housing price went up on the roof. So it was a supply and demand imbalance also the reason behind the strong Korea's housing price. Next page. I think that right now it's not just Korea. Globally, the inflation is becoming a concern, and Korea's case also we see the inflation and core inflation, it has been rising quite rapidly. Usually, our inflation target is 2% in Korea. Our inflation never broke 2%, probably almost the last 10 years. So, but for 2021, since second quarter, our the CPI is over like a 2.5%, and also like we're going to see like over 3% CPI in October, and also we'll see another kind of a 2% level of the CPI in the fourth quarter of 2022. Then we are going to see like for year long, our CPI is going to be close to like a 2.3 or 2.4%. So that is a beating kind of target of the Bank of Korea. But if you see the 2-year average of the CPI, it's still like a less than 2%. And also 2022, we expect the CPI is going to come down to 1.6% level. So I think that the CPI, the inflation is going to be transient in Korea because of declining demographics and an aging society. There is a kind of limited room for the CPI breakup. And also like we haven't seen wage increase in Korea. So right now, CPI is rising because of supply bottleneck, and there has been a kind of bad weather in Korea, and also there was a kind of a disease for the pork and the chicken, which drive up the agricultural product price, and also because of the supply bottleneck, the import price of the agricultural product has been rising quite rapidly. So, and also like as we know, oil price has been rising quite rapidly. That has been the main driver of the CPI, and we think that will eventually kind of go away in 2021. So, but the thing is, like inflation has been, we thought it's going to go away around third quarter of this year, but now we see like inflation will go away in the fourth quarter of next year. So it keeps dragging and it lasting longer and longer, which brings a concern for the market participants. So even though I believe like inflation is going to be transitory, I think it remains a concern to many like the stakeholders. Next page. So as I say, Korea has been quite strong and economically for 2021. Like the growth is close to 4%, and our export has been very strong. You know, there has been a lot of like dollar supply because of strong export. So Korean won should have been appreciated. But Korean won started around 1080 early this year, and it is traveling around 1170. It broke near the like 1200, which is a bit weird considering Korea's strong performance. But you can see that like in right-hand side the graph, like if you Korea's current account surplus is big when the export is bad, but the import is worse. That we have a strong kind of current account surplus. When export is good and import is better, then our current account depreciates. So which is the case for this year. Even though we see a very kind of strong export, the import was very strong because of the firms are investing. That has been kind of eat up the current account surplus, which means that we are going through a current account deficit. We still have a current account surplus, like which is going to be close like a 70 billion for 2021. But considering Korea's like export is growing like over like a 25% for this year, we see only slightly larger, but the similar level of current account surplus losses. So it sounds weird, but it's because of the strong import. So as you can see, the graph is in right-hand side graph, kind of two-shaped, like a current account surplus is big when the Korea's like export, the growth is bad and growth is very strong. So that is a bit kind of the different shape of the graph shows like the current account dynamics in Korea. So which means like a current account is not growing when the GDP growth is very strong. Like a GDP growth is weak, still like we can have a strong current account surplus. So that is a bit kind of a counterintuitive. As next page. So in summary, I think like Korea was able to kind of reshape the recovery, which is probably a bit different from other economies, but that has been the case in Korea during the pandemic or epidemic and the MERS and the SARS. So this was not the kind of exceptional case for Korea's perspective. And the government has been very effective, and the government is a big factor during the pandemic, which is we think like Korean government is still effective, and we can depend on the government when there is a risk. And also, like Korea could do better than other economies. We think like Korea is a manufacturing-based economy, export economy than other economies. So I think that has been the kind of benefit for Korea. So the lesson for probably the COVID is going to be like every country need to have production capacity if it was a kind of a self-dependent during the kind of lockdown or close up kind of the environment. And also, as I say, like a safety net played a big part of kind of resolving unemployment rate, and which has supported the consumption. So, which is social safety net played a key role for Korea's resilience. And as I say, I mean, because of the pandemic, it's a rebound shows some K-shaped rebound. So richer got richer, and then poor got poor. So that is going to be the problem. And I think the government role to resolve those issues is going to be the key kind of a policy issue for 2022, and also like that is going to be a headache for the policy makers too. As I said, the asset price has been moving rapidly because of abundant liquidity, and I think from next year, from we will see like a tapering. I think it was going to be announced like in November, and we'll see it kind of end around 2022, and we may see some signs of the race hike. That is going to kind of a big issue for the asset price for 2002, and also that is going to impact the inflation. But right now, there is a big concern for the rising asset price and the inflation. So when you provide a lot of liquidity, it's hard to avoid like asset price hike and inflation. So I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, please send me an email, and I'm happy to answer. And next year, hopefully, I can see you face to face. Thank you. Thank you for listening.